Hi, I'm Jenny Shampo. I'm the director of the Book of Mormon Art Catalog, and I'm here today with Richard Oman. Thank you for coming, Richard.
Good to be here.
He's joining us by Zoom today from his home in Utah. Richard is an art historian, and he was the curator of the Museum of Church History and Art for many years. That's now renamed the Church History Museum. Same institution, though. While he was there at the museum, he began the International Art Competition, which is still going strong today. He's the co-author of Images of Faith, Art of the Latter-day Saints, and also of CCA Christensen, Mormon Pioneer Artist. And he served on the Temple Art Committee for 25 years, where he had a great influence on the architecture of LDS temples. And he worked to get original art and stained glass into temples. So we're really honored to have such a great art historian and someone who's done so much to serve the arts community within our church with us today. The scriptures we're looking at are 1 Nephi chapters 16 to 22. And the artwork that we've chosen is a mola by Graciela Archibald. This is from 1983. Richard, can you first tell us where this piece came from and how it ended up in the Church History Museum?
Well, it's done by an artist from the Kuna Indian tribe. They live just off the coast of Panama on some little islands. And molas have become, in many ways, kind of the national folk art form of the country of Panama, and become quite famous for works of art and have been collected by art collectors all over the world. And I knew that we had members of the church down there, and including the first chapel in Panama was built on one of the islands with the Kuna Indians. I knew that there was this wonderful art down there by Latter-day Saints, and I wanted to include that in the church museum collection because we try to collect art from Latter-day Saints all over the world. And so I worked with the wife of the mission president down there, Sister Shirtliff, and we encouraged the artist down there to create some works of art for the church museum. And that was in 1983. And then in 1989, we made a major exhibit at the church museum on these molas.
Can you tell me a little bit about the artistic process here? What are the materials used? I mean, I see it's a textile. Can you tell me more about this process?
Well, originally, these were panels that were designed to go on the front and back of blouses of the Kuna women. And then they would hook them together and put some little sleeves on them and a yoke across the top, and that would be the blouse. And they've been making these now for about 140 years, and they're made out of multiple layers of fabric. And then they cut down through the upper layers and expose the colors of the layers underneath in order to get the image. So it's kind of a reverse applique. And they do very, very tiny, meticulous stitches, which they take a great deal of pride in hiding the stitches in terms of folding the fabric under and making them very tiny. So they take a great deal of pride in their craftsmanship. And they'll spend sometimes 3 or 4 weeks or even longer making just one little panel.
Wow.
And many hours per day. So they're meticulously crafted.
How do you think that this depiction of the Liahona compares to others that we're more familiar with? And why might it be important to have that variety of styles and approaches?
Well, that brings us to looking at the whole concept of folk art. Folk art tends to be traditional. They tend to be very conservative in the use of techniques. The way that folk artists learn how to do the art is much less formal and much more informal. That is to say, their teachers are usually mom and grandma,
Mm-hmm.
or perhaps a beloved neighbor or friend. And it's passed down from generation to generation. So it's very experiential in terms of learning, and it's very family centric and community centric in terms of the tradition. Now, when we look at the style, in some ways, folk art tends to be more abstract
Mm-hmm.
and more intellectual and more symbolic.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason for that is that the folk artist is often doing forms and communicating ideas that are widely shared with the potential viewer.
Mm-hmm.
And the expectation is that the viewer will bring their knowledge to the situation and fill in the context and the visual context of the work of art.
Mm-hmm.
And so the artist doesn't have to put all of the details in because they know that you can provide many of those details. If you look at this mola, you can see it's quite abstract.
Mm-hmm.
It's a round sphere, and you can see some pointers, and you can see some little legs on it, but it's pretty abstract and basic. So that's part of what is the nature of folk art. And the reason that matters to us as Latter-day Saints is that when you look at where the church is expanding to all over the world, it's expanding most rapidly in areas where folk art is the major art form. So if you want to see the art of our fellow Latter-day Saints in many parts of the world, adapting our vision to think about art as folk art will help us find these pieces to be accessible.
Mm-hmm.
In the scriptures, we're told that everybody will hear the gospel in their own language. Well, there are visual languages just like there are verbal languages. And understanding the variety of visual languages will help us understand the, should we say, visual voices of the saints around the world. And so in the visual arts, in many ways, we're able to transcend our lack of verbal knowledges and hear their voices and see their testimonies visually. And this is a way to hear from the actual rank and file of the saints out there.
Yeah.
Not simply the elite leaders, but the average member of the church. And so folk arts become crucial in connecting horizontally between ourselves and our fellow saints all over the earth.
I love that thought. And I think for those of us that are in the United States that are used to seeing the more figurative illustrations of scriptures, seeing a piece like this is different. But as you're explaining this kind of more simplified, abstract geometric design, although it may seem radical to us, it actually is the tradition. It is the traditional style in these other cultures. And I like the way you said it presents the scene or the scripture in a very kind of straightforward way. So these scriptures come from 1 Nephi 16. What are your thoughts on how it relates to these scriptures?
what we're getting with the Liahona in this mola is saying, think about Liahonas and look at those, and then dig in the scriptures and find details. Look into your own life and ask yourself about getting directions from the Lord. And the Liahona becomes in this mola becomes a springboard for searching the scriptures and looking at your own soul. And so it's in some ways kind of a giant memory prompter.
Yeah. And in the scripture, it also says that the Liahona works according to the faith and diligence that the people gave to it. Do you think that comes into play here too?
Well, that's what we're expected to do, isn't it? When we look at it and we think about it. And once again, if we look at a scripture in First Nephi, Nephi talks about the scriptures and he says, and we did liken them unto ourselves. And so when we look at the Liahona, the challenge that the artist is presenting to us is, so how does it work for you? What are you doing in your life? Because the emphasis is on the thematic idea of a Liahona, not looking at tiny details of curious workmanship, because thinking on the spiritual dimension of what the Liahona is supposed to mean to us and how we can apply it, which comes back directly to what you just referenced, that it should be a springboard for us asking questions to ourselves about the nature of, are we listening to the Spirit? Are we being in tune? Are we living the kind of lives that can connect and that the Spirit can get through to?
That's great. I know you when you were at the Church History Museum, you did so much work in reaching out to members of the church all around the world. I'm really grateful to you for the work that you did over the years to bring those different voices and styles into our our visual repertoire. If any of our viewers are interested in seeing more of that, a lot of the pieces that Richard brought into the collection are based on Lehi's dream of the Tree of Life. And so that if you wanted to look at the Book of Mormon art catalog and look up Lehi's dream or First Nephi 8, you'll see a lot of these beautiful images that Richard helped bring in from Hopi potters to South American textiles, Navajo rug weavings, all kinds of different ways people were finding a way to bring their own culture and worldview into the LDS scriptures, into the Book of Mormon, and it's really beautiful.
And I think of the internationalization of the church and how we're in the gospel has now been carried to over 100 countries, and we have branches all over the earth. And I think of that wonderful scripture in Ephesians 2, where the Apostle Paul says, we are no more strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens with the saints and of the household of God. Well, this mola is what that looks like today. That we are all connected. We're all Latter-day Saints all over the earth. We may come from different cultures. We may express the gospel with different verbal and visual languages, but we bring to it the commonality of the Spirit and the commonality of testimonies of the restored gospel in the Book of Mormon. And works of art like this mola remind us that wonderful verse and admonition from Paul is alive and well among Latter-day Saints today. And visually, this is what it looks like.
Fantastic. Thank you.